الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا ويهد الله فلا مضل له ويضلل فلا هادي له واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers, before getting into the theme of my short message today, I will ask that we remember our brothers and sisters of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad who are suffering or under stress. That oftentimes the only thing that we have to offer is our dua, and the Prophet Muhammad has made it clear that the most powerful weapon that we have at our disposal is dua. So let us remember our brothers and sisters, whether we know of their circumstance or not, whether they are in our families, whether they are in our Jamaat, whether they are in this country or somewhere else. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in this ummah. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where 3 young people were executed because of the hatred that was whipped up against Islam and Muslims. Let us remember our 15-year-old Hafiz, Somali brother, who because of hatred and Islamophobia was deliberately hit and murdered by a Christian Somali, and hit to the point that his legs were severed from his body. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in Europe, where 10 countries have established laws where the zabiha halal is forbidden. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in countries in Europe where the hijab, in some form or another, in 3 countries, have been made forbidden. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in Switzerland, where minarets, because of the hatred and fear of Islam and Muslims, have been forbidden. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this option of dua. And whether we know of the condition of the suffering of our brothers and sisters or not, remember them on this day in our dua. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established for this ummah a very high standard of conduct in the society. That you and I know that as we move throughout the land, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed this responsibility on us to not just be people who are silent witnesses to injustice, but those who take a stand, that those who express their iman by doing whatever is at our disposal. You know the hadith better than I, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has, in talking about iman, has made it very clear that if you and I see something that is wrong, then we have to stop it with our hands. If we can't stop it, then we have to at least speak out against the wrong. And if we're in such a weak state in the society or in our environment that we cannot even speak out against it, we must hate it in our heart and not be a part of the fitna, of the dhulm, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has made it clear that after this, no matter how many salah we make, no matter how many months of Ramadan we observe, that after this, if you and I don't at least hate the wrongdoing around us, whether it's in our houses, no matter where it is, whether it's against ourselves and what we are doing against our parents, our kith and our kin, that if we don't at least hate this in our heart and want to do better, then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that we have no iman at all. So I just want to talk briefly about this high standard that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala particularly have established for us when it comes to the area of justice in the society. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in part of this ayah revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawmina bil qisti shuhada lillahi. Oh, you who believe, be standard bearers for justice. Be those who stand out firmly for justice, that our identification in the society in which we live will be those that when people look to the Muslims, they will see that this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are a constant reminder to any society in which we are, that we are that standard bearer, that we are the ones that if no one else is calling for justice in the land, that we, those who are a part of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that we are those standard bearers. There's so many examples from the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In the interest of time, I'll just share and remind myself and remind you of a few of these instances. You and I know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has made it clear that if any one of us, that if we go to bed with a full stomach and our neighbors are hungry, then there's not belief, that we are not among the believers. That part of this being a part of the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that you and I will go beyond what we are required to do. That having food in our houses, like I and so many of us oftentimes waste food, knowing that at least 49 million people in America go to bed at almost near the point of starvation. That if you and I are not conscious of this, and when we become conscious of this, then we will extend ourselves the way that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did, to determine what are the needs, give it to those. Don't wait for someone to come and ask for sadaqah, to ask for zakah. That if we're to be standard bearers for justice, then it requires that we go that extra step, find out what are the needs of the people in the land and help to meet those needs. Brothers and sisters, we have this example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from the pages of the early days of the Islamic movement of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, in those days and where the oppression was very hard on the believers. We find, and you know the history better than I, that in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that in those early days that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that all he could do in many circumstances when his Sahaba were being tortured to death was to go and stand by their side, like he did with Sumayya, like he did with her husband, like he did with so many of the early believers in Mecca, that he was in such a state that all he could do was go by their side and tell them, just have sabr, just be patient. That I can't do anything right now, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you are patient, if you just bear what you have right now with patience, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a much greater reward in store for you. We have the example from the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the early pages of this history of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where a merchant came to Mecca and he was trading with Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl took all of his merchandise, and the merchant who was not from the tribes of Mecca thought that Abu Jahl was going to give him a fair exchange, and Abu Jahl took everything that he had. And so this man started going around appealing to the leaders of Mecca, going from one person to the next, telling them that I'm not from here, someone please help me. So they came up with this idea, we have a good joke, we have a good laugh. And so we'll tell them to go to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he will get your goods back. You know better than I that Abu Jahl was the Fir'aun of the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the one of the greatest persecutors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba. So the man didn't know that they were playing a joke. So those leaders of Mecca stood around waiting to have a good laugh. So he was told where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. He went to our messenger. And immediately the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam got up and went to Abu Jahl's house and knocked on his door. When Abu Jahl opened the door, it's like, well, what do you want, Muhammad? He said, you have taken the property of this man. There was no justice in this. Give this man his property back. Keep in mind, this was not at the time of the establishment of an Islamic state in Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the head of the believers in a physical army type of way, that he was able to raise armies. This was in the weakest stage of the history of Islam under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Abu Jahl with the Meccan leaders standing around and waiting. Let's see if Abu Jahl punches him in his face. Let's see if he slaps him. What is he going to do? So Abu Jahl goes into his house and retrieves the property and brings it out. And he gives the property back to the man. When the man takes his property away, they ask Abu Jahl, these Meccan leaders, his kinsmen, asked him, what were you doing? We expected you at least to smack him. What were you doing? And Abu Jahl said that, didn't you see those camels on either side of my back? They were the most vicious camels I've ever seen in my life. I was afraid that if I didn't do what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, they were going to devour me. So they just walked away and they thought Abu Jahl must be going crazy. No one saw this but Abu Jahl, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he was standing up for justice in his weakest state. He wasn't waiting until he was the head of a state. He was weak. The Muslims were weak. But yet the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is standing up to this head chief. We find that the spirit of standing for justice was passed down through this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam
in the interest of time, I just want to give just a couple of quick examples. One, we know the story, we know the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu. We know how Umar was so firm, that he was so decisive in Haqq versus Batil, that he earned the name of Al-Faruq, that he was the separator of truth from falsehood. We know the story that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said about Al-Faruq, that if he's walking down the street and Shaitan is walking, then Shaitan will move. He would get across the street. He didn't want to confront Umar. We know how the story when Umar became the caliph over the Muslims, that he was so just, he was so keen in trying to determine the needs of the believers, that at night, and this was a man that the history records about him, this was a man that rarely slept. One of his wives was recorded as saying that, I can't remember this man laying down going to sleep. He was like a little child, a toddler, just running and then just drop. He would lean up against the wall and just go to sleep and get up and either make salah or keep on doing what he was doing. So at night, Umar would walk the streets of Medina to determine, are there needs that I'm missing? Is there some injustice being done? It was not something that were part of his duties and responsibilities. It was not that this is what he had to do, but this was his practice. And one night, as he walked the streets incognito, this was before the cell phones with the cameras, this was before CNN or the internet, so many people, even in Medina, could not even recognize Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. And one of these nights, the story goes that he was leaning against a wall, and he overheard a mother speaking with her daughter. And the mother was saying that we didn't get as much milk to take to the market the next day, so put water in the milk. And so it will be heavier, we can get more money. We didn't get as much as we expected. And the girl, the young girl, told her mother, the Khalid Umar said, don't do this, that this is unjust to the people who may buy it. Be fair, be honest. And the mother responded, well, Umar's not here. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, leaning on this wall, overheard this young girl telling her mother, well, Umar may not be here, even though she didn't know he was on the other side of the wall. He may not be here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything and all that we do. Umar had someone with him. He said, look, go knock on the door. I want to know who that young girl is. The man he was with, the Sahaba he was with, came back and said, well, she's a nice young lady, she's not married. Umar went back to his house and he told his sons, I've met a young girl, I've heard a young girl, that if you want a Zawj, then this is who you should marry. His son, Asim, stepped forward. He was not married at the time. He married this young lady. From this marriage there was a daughter. And the daughter married the son of Caliph Marwan, who was the caliph over the Muslims at the time. And this son was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the one that Umar ibn al-Khattab said that I had a dream. This is when he was the caliph, that I have dreamed that one of my progeny, one of my descendants is going to be a ruler over this ummah, and he's going to fill the earth with justice. He's going to stand for justice in ways that I never could have imagined. And one thing about him, that they will recognize him because he'll have a scar on his face. This was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz when he was a kid. an animal kicked him in his face, and he had a scar either over his eye or somewhere on his forehead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this story, and I'm coming to a close, of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one who reminded this ummah in the way he dispensed justice. Before he became the caliph, he was appointed like the wali of Medina. That Umar ibn Abdul Aziz served in that capacity for only 7 years. And the history records that he was removed from the position because he was making the other governors look bad. He was too just. He was too honest. So after 7 years, he was removed from this position as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as he became the caliph. His rule was one that reminded the people of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It reminded the people of Abu Bakr, of Umar, of Uthman, of Ali. This was a man, this was a caliph who was following the instruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not just be just, but be a standard bearer for justice in the society. To be one who will make a difference in whatever area of responsibility that you may have.
ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. The responsibility and duty of being standard bearers for justice is not something that is abstract. It's not something that are just words. It is a requirement of each and every one of us to stand for justice, to be those who, through our actions and through our words, are standard bearers for justice in the society. That being a standard bearer for justice does not mean attacking anyone. It means standing for truth. And so when hate-filled people like Pamela Geller will say that I have a contest, who can give me the most insulting cartoon, who can draw the thing that defames the Prophet Muhammad the most, I'll give you $10,000. If you can draw me a cartoon that insults Muhammad in a way that he hasn't been insulted by these other people. It doesn't mean that we as Muslims look for her to attack her. But it means that standing for justice and standing up for the Prophet Muhammad means that we have to know about our Prophet. How can we defend, how can we say we love someone if we don't know about him and about his life, about the impact that he's had on this world? It's not just enough to repeat the Shahada again and again in our Salah and pray for the peace, pray for the blessings on the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We must know who he is. And standing for justice is standing and letting the world know who is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Brothers and sisters, we are living in a time today where not just the Muslims, but Islam itself is under attack. I come from the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is one of 10 states in this country who have passed legislation. They don't call it anti-Sharia law right now because they couldn't make it through appeals courts, but they call it anti-foreign laws. But North Carolina is one of 10 states that have this legislation.
that there is an environment, that we're living in a time that no matter what we have done up to this point, now is the time for us to stand for justice and stand for what is right. I mentioned in the first khutbah, and I'll say in closing, that the murder of those 3 young people in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on February the 10th, it was a horrible, horrible event. It is an event that was so terrifying to so many of the Muslims that some of the Muslims are whispering to one another, please don't say the expression hate crime. We don't want anybody to think that we're angry. So after these 3 young people are lined up in their apartment and shot in the back of the head, then some kind of way we're not even supposed to say, and Allah forgive me, I'm not trying to talk about any individuals, I'm just making a generalized statement. And I'm trying to appeal to myself and appeal to you. Now is the time. At this point in history, now is the moment that you and I have this opportunity given to us by Allah to be standard bearers for justice, to show our neighbors, to show the world what Islam does for us as individuals and collectively when times are good and when times are more trying, like it has been for those in North Carolina and across the country with the execution of Dia Barakat, of his wife Yusur al-Saha and her sister Razan al-Saha. We are challenged, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us this opportunity to stand strong for that which is right. I want to end on this story because it's a kind of very inspirational example of, even in times, in difficult times, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises examples. And I want to go way back in time and look at someone who is arguably amongst the Christians that perhaps one of the most well-known and quoted Christian monk-type people who only lived for 44 years. I'm talking about a person that lived in the 12th century by the name of St. Francis from Assisi. St. Francis from Assisi was a person that during the Crusades, in about 1291, he went to Egypt to meet with the Caliph of the Muslims. And at this meeting, he was appealing to the Caliph that there's so much hatred, there's so much violence against each other that's going on. Can't we just stop this for a moment? Can't we recognize that humanity will better be served by our not killing one another? And when he returned back to his home, one of the friars approached him and asked him and told him that we have found this book that we think is the book of the Muslims, that this is the book that they call the Quran, that this is the book that all of us as Christians say we hate this book because we hate the Muslims. This was a time that you and I can only imagine the kind of hatred for Muslims during the period of the Crusades. So these friars approached St. Francis and they said, we have this book, what do we do with it? And St. Francis was reported of saying that if you find a single page of this Quran, then you should first kiss it, and then you should place it somewhere where it won't be disturbed, because these are the words coming from God. There's one God, and these are words that are coming from Him. This is something said by a leading Christian at the time of the Crusades. So I just close by saying that if you and I stand strong, remain those standard bearers for justice, that there will be allies, there will be those who will say that we know these people are for what is right. We know what they stand for. We know that they're decent human beings, that they're for justice and right.
ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار.